Thank you all for coming. As Pam said, my name is Scott Heckes, and I'm a board member for the Kingsley Art Club. And it's my great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Karen Alkons. Karen is a conservator of art on paper and paintings. And I think as such, she's an artist, she's a scientist, and I think we're going to learn too that in some cases she's a magician too, with some of the things that she's been able to do, and we'll learn about that today. Karen has a degree in studio art from the University of California at Davis, and she received training in art conservation at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, and additional work with James Alkons, Mr. James Alkons, who's here today. And together they founded the Northern California Art Conservators. And so we'll learn a little bit about what they've done. Karen has provided consultation and conservation services for a number of organizations and entities in this region, including the Crocker Art Museum. She's done work for us. She's done work at the Hagen Museum in Stockton. She's done work with the McHenry Museum in Modesto, California Department of Parks and Recreation, the California State Library, the Colton Museum in Monterey, and the Monterey Maritime Museum as well. And as a professional conservator, she holds memberships in the International Institute for Conservation of Art and Antiquities, the American Institute for Conservation of Artistic Works, and the Western Association for Art Conservation. So if you'd please join me in having our speaker, Karen Alkons. Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Alkons, and Scott gave me a wonderful, wonderful lead-in, and I would like to say that today we're going to look at a conservation treatment for a mural that is actually up in the Matthews Gallery here in the Crocker. And the mural has an interesting background. It was originally, or the first time I saw it was back in the 80s, and the Crocker had it in the basement for many years. It had been taken out of a building in San Francisco many years ago, and was had been rolled initially and then had been crushed. And so that posed a lot of challenges for us. The back of it was also very, very heavily plastered, adhered. The adhesion was a possibility that there was lead in the adhesive layer, and so I'll show you today how we went through and solved all of our problems so that the mural is now on display. This is the vision of St. Francis. This is how it looks today. The following slides show the damaged condition of the image area. As I said, it had been rolled and crushed. And so at regular intervals throughout the entire image area, there were large areas of loss. And there were large areas of lifting and deformations in the surface area. There were also very interesting, someone at some point had taken duct tape and adhered it to the front of the mural. And the duct tape had long since gotten old and had fallen away, but the adhesive was left. And it was no longer sticky, it had cross-linked, chemically cross-linked, so that it was as hard as a rock. And again, here's the deformations from having been rolled. And again. And this is how we solved it. We took the tip of a very sharp little scalpel, and we just very carefully inched that adhesive off, and it left the paint underneath. The most wonderful thing about Arthur Matthews is he used great paint. The following slide shows the arduous process of the removal of the plaster and the adhesive layers from the reverse. The hard residues are removed using typhoon burrs, and the dust is removed with the suction. And this was especially necessary because there was a possibility that there was both lead and asbestos in the adhesive layer. There was a lot of plaster. And so what we did is we set up these areas with plexiglass on top and the vacuum going into a heap of vacuum, and using the typhoon burrs on the Dremel tool. We very carefully just ground the back off. And this was especially necessary because of the deformations that were on the front of it. You know, that they wouldn't go down if the adhesive adhesive layer wasn't taken care of properly. And there we are. We've got 2 stations going at this point. We're very trying to make the best of our time. And this is the layer that we got it down to. You want to see a little bit of canvas weave, but you don't want to go through. And so that's what you want to see. After the removal of the plaster residue, the artwork is lined to an aluminum honeycomb panel using Viva 371 adhesive on the vacuum hot table. And the Viva 371 adhesive is reversible in heat, reversible in xylene. It's beloved by conservators all the world over. And here is a cross-section of the panel. We have wood around the edges so that things can be adhered to or attached to the panels. And you'll see a little bit later on why we did that. And there's you can just barely see the sky underneath all of here, but it's on the panel. It's packed for lining. It's got silicone release on the front of it, and you see along the sides that we have attached linen strips. And that's very important for this because this was larger than our hot table. And it was important for us to be able to get a good suction going throughout the piece. And so in order to do that, we had to make a vacuum envelope. So what we did is we took the Dartek, which is the surface material, and we rolled it over the front of it, attached it on the back, and then attached the vacuum ports, 2 ports, one at top, one bottom, and then we lined it on the vacuum hot table, and at this point we were able to move the panel around with our hands, and we were monitoring the heat level every place on the panel so that we knew we had even heat, and we also knew that it would stick. After the lining, the painting was cleaned. This would be with diammonium citrate or ammonium citrate dibasic, 2% pH, balanced to a pH of 8, and we varnished it after that. You also do a rinse before you varnish. And the loss areas were filled with Motostuck fill material, and then they were smoothed down. And there it is, with all of its little fills in there ready for in-painting. And so the fills are in-painted using a reversible acrylic in-painting media. And you want an acrylic in-painting media because the solubility are different. You want your in-painting media to be able to be removable permanently, whereas you want the original material to stay put. And there's St. Francis after in-painting. And there's, if you recall, there was a very long strip running through this lady's arm. And also through the section of the group. And there it is. We really enjoyed working on it, and had are very, very pleased and privileged to have been able to work on this for Crocker Art Museum. And then I have a second presentation. And this is one that I especially like because it was just so much fun to do. This is overpaint removal on a painting by artist Otis Oldfield. This one is also up in the galleries. Belonging Crocker Art Museum, titled Steamboat Landing. There it is, before treatment, and you kind of get the idea that there's a little bit of a greenish sky. And it's not unpleasant, but this is something that we found out about it a little bit later on. It says in an ultraviolet light photograph of the artwork, you see that the sky has this very strange look going up into the image area. And that is all old overpaint. So you see the sky near where the steamboat is, and then you see up, and it just gets darker and darker and darker, and that's the layer of overpaint that the painting has on it. And there's a cleaning test. So you see that it reveals that the sky is much bluer underneath the old acrylic overpaint. And this was interesting to me because I said, well, there's a lot of overpaint on this painting. What am I going to be uncovering? So I did some more tests. And we got to the layer of original loss area, and it really was not that bad. It was minimal compared to what had been put over it, and so unnecessary. And then I did the in-painting in just the areas of fill material, and this side, although it shows my in-painting in those dark, shadowy areas up on the top. And there it is. And then I have one more. It says, a no dog and pony show would be complete without the following. And this is the dog and the pony. And that's the pony and the dog when they came in, and it had just loads and loads of flaking paint and so messed up. and through one thing and another, we did local consolidation with Biva D8, and we did a lining with, I think we had a Lascaux adhesive layer put on there, and then there was the Biva layer, and then it was frame or lined, and then cleaned, filled, and in-painted, and there it is. And all of those hours that I spent as a child drawing horses really came in of value to me. So it all paid off, and there we are. Do we have any questions? Yes.
See if there's...
When do you decide if a painting's not worth doing? Does it have to be by some famous artist? Does it have to be, when is it not worth it?
Well, when is it, there are various parameters where you decide when you're going to do it. It's like any kind of, say, like surgery. It's like there's elective surgery, there's, the necessary surgery, there's cosmetic surgery, there's, all sorts of things. In this case, these were all worth doing. The little piece of the dog and the pony probably was not monetarily worth it, but it was worth it to her, to the owner, and so we went ahead and did it.
Did you do the in-painting on the St. Francis? And when you go to do in-painting, do you get nervous? Like, what am I going to paint it?
Well, there are some nerves involved with that. Yes, but by the time we did St. Francis, even though there was a lot of in-painting to do and a lot of colors to match, we were all up to it by then. I'd already been a conservator for 20 years or so, so I thought, well, it's a lot of work, but we can do it.
Do you restore sculptures as well as paintings?
I have done some sculptures. I've done some wooden sculptures, but in general, no. Some polychromes on wood, I have done those, but I try not to take in too many objects because objects tend to take up a lot more time and are sometimes difficult to gauge how long they're going to be worked on. So.
How do you deal with cracked paint
Well,
as it ages, and what is the degradation process that you watch as these paintings age from, say, 1900 on?
Okay. There's a lot of different kinds of cracking of paint. There's structural cracking. There's cracking that involves the canvas. There's cracking in the paint layer. There's cracking in the varnish layer. Sometimes artists use materials like bitumen, asphaltum, and so on, and you end up with cracking that is not structural, but it's in the paint, and there's a lot of it. I've worked on a lot of paintings that have cracking of this type, and that's just since it's not structural, you just do the in painting with the little tiny brushes, and in paint the cracks. The structural cracks, when it gets to that point, you have to start thinking about a lining for your artwork, and that would be putting a backing on it, and sometimes an auxiliary backing behind that, put on with Biva 371 and on the vacuum hot table, and then that's how you would take care of that one. There is also a certain amount of structural cracking that can be taken care of by just getting a little bit of Biva D8, which is a white glue, but very, very thin and able to be thinned out very well. And sometimes you can get that one to work. So, there are various methods for dealing with various kinds of cracks.
Yes, on the Steamboat Landing painting,
Yes.
the infill paint in the sky, the greenish infill paint that you had to remove, do you have any idea who would have done that layer and why?
It's after the fact, it's hard to imagine why that in painting got so big. But sometimes I have to say, perhaps, although it was not badly done, it was not unpleasant, it was just the wrong color. and it was big, and it didn't have to be that big. And so perhaps, whoever was doing the in painting just got overexcited and put too much on.
Karen,
Yes.
what is the oldest piece of art that you've worked on, and is it challenging to match an acrylic to an oil?
The oldest piece of art that we've ever worked on was done by my husband Jim, and it was a mummy's hand, and it was several thousand years old. And the mummy's hand was flaking, and the skin was falling off, and he had to glue all that on. And as Jim says, is like they would come in the morning and try to figure out if the hand had moved during the night.
When matching the colors for your in-painting,
Yes.
do you use, is it just your eye, the human eye, or do you have any type of measuring or calibrating device in order to assure that the tonality and the hue is true?
That's a very good question. And anymore, because I've had so much experience, I just use my eye. But starting at the beginning, when I'm bringing on a young person, an assistant, is I have a large layer or large chart of colors, and I say, okay, now use this chart to match your colors and see what you're going to put out on your palette. And then we'll work together, and I say, okay, is this the right yellow? Is this the right blue? Is this the right green? And if we mix these, because there's a kind of a little trick, is when many artists mix up their palettes and the original art, what tends to happen is they tend to use the same colors all over again too. So if you match your colors and you get your palette right, you can do the whole painting.
How does one get into the conservator business? Do you have to kind of work with somebody like you?
Well, yeah, that's probably the most direct way, is to do the apprentice route. And what many people in schools do is that they have already spent a year or two apprenticing in a conservation lab. And then they apply to go to school. And now you also have to have a year of chemistry, and have all of your scholastics in order, and then you get into a school. You spend 2 to 3 years in a school, and then you get an internship, basically, in a museum, hopefully one of the good museums, and you know, but then after that, you can either try to find a job at a museum, or then you try to find or you start a business of your own, and that works too.
What would you tell painters? How would you tell them to paint so that your services wouldn't be needed?
Well, that's, you know, that's what's supposed to be taught in the art schools, in the basics of painting. But there is so much to know about building a good painting. There's the ground layer. You know, first, you know, are you going to put it on a panel, or are you going to put it on canvas? What kind of ground are you going to put on it? Is it going to be a gesso ground, or is it going to be a glue ground, or is it, you know, there are various things. You know, gesso is generally assumed to be best. Are you going to use the traditional methods of making your own gesso using rabbit skin glue and whiting? Or, you know, that's a pretty good method. That stuff lasts for, you know, 500-600 years. It's pretty good. So, you know, it's like there are various methods that can be taught in schools. After the ground comes the paint. You want to use good quality paints. You don't want to use the really, you know, the student grade paints. They don't last. And you want to use good quality materials. Don't thin your paint too much unless there's a specific technique or you know, something that you want to show specially. Use good varnishes. Just use good quality materials.
I'm wondering how, when you're finished with a treatment or during the process of the treatment, how you document that with either words or photographs, say for an institution such as the Crocker, and then does that become part of the registry for that particular art piece at the Crocker?
Yeah,
or another institution?
Yeah. Yes, you document, you do a thorough documentation, you do a condition report, and that is actually the basics, and it's very important to get your condition report right, because that leads into what you're going to do with the painting, which is a treatment proposal. And then after the treatment proposal, then everybody agrees to that's what's going to happen with the artwork, and then you get into your treatment. And in general, the treatment follows the treatment proposal. Sometimes you get little surprises, you know, and then you have to call up your client or your museum and say, hey, this has to change, and you get a yes or a no. And then in the final treatment report, you put that in. And you also do a photo documentation. You want good befores, you want good durings, you want good afters. You know, full documentation is very important for museums, because it does go into their permanent record.
I'm wondering how long your projects typically last. Was the mural the longest project you've taken on, or has there been others?
It's been one of the longest, although I have had some pieces that have taken a very, very long time. But the big mural had so much plaster and adhesive on the back of it, and we really were only able to do a little bit at a time, so that It took us the better part of a year, I think, to do that mural. Yeah.
So 2 questions.
Yes.
2 questions. Concerning the St. Francis mural.
Yes.
Do you try to match in your conservator's studio the lighting condition that the original, the context of the display context of the painting? And then secondly, do you actually put that on the label for visitors to know, similar to what they do for antiquities, that they sort of let you know where the infilling had happened? At least do you in some way indicate that on the label for the visitors to see?
Yeah, in your second question was that I generally don't include that after I've done the work and done the documentation, I generally leave that up to the museum as to whether they want to exhibit that or not. And your first question was again about?
Matching the lighting.
Matching the lighting. I try to match the lighting under the most stringent lights, the brighter lights, lights that have, and I do actually try to use different color temperature lights, because what you get going is a thing called metamerism. And that is that you've used something that has a little bit different binder in it. You're using acrylic, they painted in oil. Sometimes they're not the same, even if they're the same color. And what will happen is that in a different color temperature, your painting will shift and become more noticeable.
I have a question about murals.
Sure.
The Matthews one was on canvas, but say something that's more an antiquity, like a Roman fresco type situation.
The frescoes.
Yeah, how do museums transport, how do they get it from A to B?
Oh my goodness, it's
I've always wondered.
It's amazing. I've seen there are many techniques, and it all depends on the fresco itself, but in general, this is very generalized things. What they do is they will face the fresco. If it's going to be taken off the wall, they face it very thoroughly with various kinds of facings, and then they work from the back or from the sides to get to the back. I have seen some techniques which I think are I would never try, and one is pounding the front of the fresco and then lifting it off through the facing, and I would never want to try that. I'm sure it works for a lot of people, but I would not work that way. But there are ways like taking the wall down, and so on. So.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions.
How does restoration work impact the value of what would be considered valuable pieces?
Okay, I have 2 schools of thought on that. One that comes from the collector's market, and that is that new restoration will devalue a painting, but old restoration does not. And I think, well, but on the other hand, there's the thought that if you don't do the new restoration, the painting is either unsound, can't be sold, or has just looks wrong, and so and if you do the restoration, for instance, cleaning paintings, most paintings get cleaned. And very often the collectors and so on will want their paintings cleaned because they just don't look good. And often they have a better resale value after they are cleaned because now you can see them.
One final question.
Thank you, Karen. Just to speak to what you're speaking about, the importance of cleaning paintings. I had a very important Edgar Payne pack scene that I was selling, and it was selling on the East Coast. I wasn't involved directly with the clients, but they were very penny pinching conscious and didn't want to spend a couple, maybe $1,000 to clean this amazing painting.
Yeah.
And it cost them $100,000 in the selling price.
Oh my!
So
wow.
People don't like yellow snow.
No,
you need,
they
you know,
don't.
if somebody says the painting needs to be cleaned, it might cost a little bit, and you're looking for an outcome on the end that's going to be greater than what you put into it. You need to put the conservation into it. Thank you for everything you do.
And thank you so much for inviting me to speak.
Yeah, thank you so much.